we've been talking about the Mishnah. The Gemara has been explaining the Mishnah, which we learned in the Mishnah about, number one, we spoke about mushrooms. And one of the things we mentioned about mushrooms was that it grows from moisture, and it also, in a certain sense, it grows on the ground, but it doesn't grow directly from the ground. So I just want to clarify one thing, because Rashi over here says that if you look at if you want to follow, I'll read it inside. It's a 2-line Rashi. Rashi is the first word on the line, about 10 lines down from the top. Mirba rabu me'ara. They grow from the ground. They grow from the ground. Milachluches haaretz heim gedelim. They grow from the moisture of the earth. Al ha'etzim v'al ha'kelim, and they can even grow on wood and on vessels, but they are growing because of the moisture of the earth. So what Rashi tells us is, it's not that they grow on the ground, they grow from the ground, but not directly. They grow indirectly from the ground. What does that mean? That the ground has moisture. That moisture somehow dissolves into the air, and the mushrooms grow from the moisture that originates from the ground. So can you call it the fruit of the ground? No, it's indirect, but it is something that grows from the ground, from the moisture that started out in the ground. So it's not a direct growth from the ground. It's not intrinsically connected to the ground, but it does grow from the moisture that was originally in the ground. Okay, so that's one thing about the mushrooms. And of course, the bracha that we said about mushrooms from our Mishnah is shahakol.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's that the ground hosts the mushroom, and other processes transpire from the hosting.
Right. So that's what we initially were saying. But I see in Rashi, that's not exactly the way Rashi is learning it. Rashi's understanding it that it's not that it just, because they even grow on other things. They grow on wood. Sure. They can grow on other items. So Rashi's not learning it that way. And he's saying it does grow from the ground, but it grows indirectly from the ground.
Right.
Moisture in the earth. Yeah, right. Somehow, I guess,
some metamorphosis it goes through, right?
And it changes, and then it grows from that moisture that's in the air. So the Mishnah also mentioned that noivlois are shahakol. The Gemara tried to figure out what noivlois are, and we mentioned that noivlois there are two opinions. Noivlois either means that the heat burned these dates and they dried them out. And another explanation is that the dates were blown off the tree, and they're called tamri dezika. And that would be the meaning of noivlois. Now, there are other explanations of these words, bushle kamra and tamri dezika. And Ezra brought yesterday, mentioned about, is it talking about before they're ripe or after they're ripe, that they were blown off the tree? And I mentioned him that there were different ways of learning, even in the bushle kamra, how to translate it. But ultimately, the Gemara is bothered with this. How could you say this tamri dezika, that these dates that are the wind blows them off the tree? Why would they lose their bracha? Why would they not be the regular bracha? Just because how they were harvested. They were harvested a little differently. Does that make them lose their bracha? So because of that, the Gemara says that our Mishnah cannot mean the tamri dezika. And the wording of the Gemara is Kule alma loy pligi. No one argues that when it just says noivlois, it means bushlei chamra. It means the other explanation, that they're burned from the heat. And because they're burned from the heat and they're dried out, that would make them a date that its quality has been ruined, almost like what we learned earlier, that when you cook certain fruits, it could lose its bracha ha'etz, because it's not meant to be cooked. It tastes worse when it's cooked, and therefore it would lose its quality of being called a fruit of the tree, because the fruit of the tree could be, if the common way to eat it is raw, then if you cook it and it's not the common way and it doesn't taste as good, you've ruined it. The bracha would be lowered. Here also, the bracha of the dates have been lowered from the ha'etz bracha to the shahakol. Yes, Robert. You're muted. You are muted.
Thank you. I understand it is that once the date essentially is blown off the tree, it essentially lost its ability to mature and become the fruit that it should have been. So therefore, it's not what we want it to be as a date. So it doesn't qualify any longer for the bracha.
So you want to follow the understanding that the date is not ripened yet, and maybe it will not ripen properly if it gets
Absolutely.
blown off.
Correct.
Now, the problem is that, well, if we want to learn the Gemara simply, Rashi doesn't tell us that it's not ripened and it won't get ripened. There are interpretations that understand that as being the other case, bushlei kamra. In other words, your case, there are opinions that say that's the other view of bushlei kamra means a date that will not ripen, and it's therefore the bracha it will not retain, it will not get that bracha of, will not be allowed the bracha of ha'etz, because it's not a quality date, and it's not the and it never ripens really. So there is such a view.
Not fit for eating. Yeah.
What you're saying is not wrong, but if you want to fit it in the words of the Tamri Dezika, it doesn't seem that that's the way Rashi learns. And the simple way of learning the Gemara is with the way Rashi's learning. Of course, there are other commentaries, and I'm telling you, it is a little confusing.
No, I understand. Sure.
But if you want to learn it the way Rashi learns it, Rashi just mentions that they're blown off the tree, and that the Gemara has a very strong question: why should it lose its bracha? But what you're saying, it does make sense, and of course, there is discussion in chapter 202 of the Shulchan Aruch. And even in the commentaries there's a major discussions there about it. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, what about figs, apples, fruits, vegetables that the storm blows off the tree or the bush? Is it the same as dates?
So for whatever reason, again, there's two parts to our Gemara. There's the initial thought, and then there is the conclusion. So in the initial thought of the Gemara, noivlois refers to that. You could say, well, what about other fruits and vegetables? In the conclusion of the Gemara, that's not the case. The conclusion of our Gemara is that noivlois only means that they're burned by the heat and dried out. And so we're not really talking about a case of being blown off the tree, and therefore you wouldn't be able to ask what will be the law if apples get blown off the tree or other things. But your question is a good question in the Havamina, in the original thought of the Gemara. What was the Gemara thinking? Why would noivlois be any different than any other fruits or vegetables? And
I think when they say heat, they also mean, the heat dries out the ground too. So many times a plant dries out a little, and loses the fruits too because of lack of water. So it's not just a storm that blows it off. You know?
So you're saying maybe that was the thought, that it would lose its moisture when it falls off, when it is blown off the tree. Right. It loses its moisture from the sun.
Even if it's not blown off, you know, the heat alone can make it drop from the tree or the bush.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The dryness alone can make it drop. The roots don't get the moisture, then the fruit drops off.
You're saying, I think what you're saying is if the wind is able to blow it off, it means that it's not absorbing enough moisture from the tree. If the fact that the wind blew it off means that it's not absorbing enough moisture from the tree, and means that maybe it's not.
The connection dries out and falls off.
Interesting. Okay, so the conclusion of the Gemara was that our Gemara is not talking about the dates that are blown off the tree. Our Gemara is talking about the dates that are burned and dried up, and that is the way the Gemara explains it. Now, there is an argument what noivlois are. That is when it says noivlois tomorrow, but the word noivlois alone cannot be translated both options. You can only use one option. But when it says noivlois tomorrow, that is where there are two ways of understanding what noivlois tomorrow are. So if it just said noivlois, then we know what it means. It's burned by the sun, by the heat, and dried up. And there, the bracha in the Mishnah we saw was shahakol, and Rabbi Yehuda said that if it's a min klala, you don't recite a bracha on it at all. Now, the Gemara now is going to tell us about the argument when that they argue what the meaning of noivlois tomorrow is. So we're going to start 6 lines up from the bottom of the page, or 7 lines up from the bottom of the page of 40b, and the words are ki pligi b'noivlois tomorrow. When do they argue? They argue regarding noivlois tomorrow. That there's 2 opinions what noivlois tomorrow are. Our noivlois tomorrow, is that the dates that are blown off the tree, or is it dates that have dried up from the heat, and because of that, they're not going to be fall into the regular category of dates. So the Mishnah says Ditnan, because we learned in a Mishnah, Hakalen Shebedemad, the lenient laws, the lenient cases in Demai. Demai, we mentioned, is a term used for produce that we are not sure if the am haaretz, the ignorant of the land, if they took meiser from it, if they took the meisers. Now we call them amei haaretz. The means that they're not well versed, and they're not so they're not as serious in Yiddishkeit. So they're called the Amei Haaretz. Literally, it means the nation of the land. People, I don't know another term for it, but the street people, maybe regular people, lay people. Now, the problem is this: everyone knows that you have to take truma. You need to take truma, which is a certain percentage for the kohen. The kohen gets a certain percentage. Now, the amei haaretz, even the street people, they do give truma to the kohen. Why do they do that? Well, the two reasons. Number one is truma is punishable by death, and that they are aware of. And number two, truma is very little. Biblically, one stalk exempts an entire huge pile. And even rabbinically, you're talking about 2%. People would be thrilled here in America if you only had to pay taxes, 2%. I mean, that would be amazing. We'd have the whole world moving to America. 2%. 2% is nothing. So even rabbinically, it's only 2%. And biblically, one little one stalk, one kernel could exempt a whole pile, a huge pile. So because of that, they gave the Amei Haaretz, they do give truma. They do separate truma. However, the other separations, like Meiser to give to the Levite, Meiser to that they give to the poor, these other separations, we are concerned that they don't separate. Even though there's discussion, but we assume that the majority maybe separate, but not everyone. And therefore, the problem is you're going to buy their produce or you're going to eat at their house. It takes from they're going to give you their produce. The problem is you're going to be eating produce that is not fully pure. It's not fully kosher yet because it hasn't had the tithings removed from it. So it's not kosher yet. It's not good. It's not a proper produce yet. So in order to make it proper, you need to separate certain tithings. On the other hand, you don't know for sure that they weren't tithed. We're just worried that they're not tithed. And the rabbis made a decree that we've got to be extra careful. And they've made a decree that we should tithe these food items that are we're getting from an Am Haaretz. Now, because we're not sure, it could be the Levite got his portion, could be he didn't. So we have to separate it. Do we have to give it to the Levite? No, because the Levite, we want prove to me that I owe it to you. We could tell the Levite, we don't know if it was taken yet or not. Could be that the Am Haaretz that I bought this produce from, maybe he did give you his tithing. Nevertheless, I have to separate. I don't have to give it to the Levite. I have to separate it. One of the reasons I have to separate it is separate it to consider it Meiser Rishon, to consider it a tithing. And then I have to separate, this is what's most important out of it, I have to separate the Levite when he gets his Meiser, what does he do with it? He has to separate a portion of it to the Kohen. It's called Trumas Meiser, Truma from the Meiser. And that's the major issue here because I don't want to have Trumas Meiser inside this produce. So I want to separate the Meiser. So I have 100 oranges. I separate 10 of them for Meiser. Then I take one of those 10 that I separated from Meiser and I say, this is Trumas Meiser. And this is going to be given to a Kohen or sold to a Kohen because it might have been separated, might not. So I would, I guess it would have to be given because it might not have been. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it has to be if it has to be sold, if it has to be given to a Kohen, or you could sell it to the Kohen. It's the reason why you would sell it to a Kohen is it's not such perfect produce for everyone. Like a Kohen has to be pure when he eats it. So it doesn't have the value. Let's say you're giving these, you have 100 oranges and you're taking 10 off for the Levite, but you're not going to give them to the Levite because it could be the Levite got his 10 oranges already, but you're separating them, officially calling them Meiser Rishon. Then you separate one from that and you take that, you give that to the Kohen, and that is called Trumas Meiser. And that would have a certain holiness to it called Truma. That has a holiness to it. A Kohen is only allowed to eat that when he's in a state of purity. So if you have something that might belong to the Kohen and might not, generally you can sell it to the Kohen and the Kohen, the reason why it would sell for much less than what a normal orange costs. So let's say an orange costs $1, this would cost 50 cents because the Kohen can only eat it at certain times. He'll say, I'm not paying $1 for that. I can't, I'd rather pay $1 for an orange that I can have whenever I want it. But this orange, I'm going to have to go to mikvah first before I eat it. Can only eat it on certain days when I went to the mikvah, when I made sure to be pure. It's not always so perfect for me, and I have to think about if I'm pure or not before I eat it. So I'm not paying $1 for it. I pay, but the point is that I cannot. The person who bought the food from the Am Haaretz, he definitely does not want to have that Trumas Meiser in that food. He wants to separate it to give that to give that to the Kohen. And ultimately, the produce, after you separate the tithings, you are then able to have this produce. Now, there are leniencies in the laws of Demai. And obviously, it makes sense. There should be, because Demai is only a extra element of being extra concerned. It's like an extra concern that you're adding on. Really, many of the Amei Haaretz did tithe. So we're going, we're doing something. The rabbis made these rules, but they also gave some leniencies in them. And one of the leniencies would be if the produce is very cheap. If it's very cheap, we assume that the Am Haaretz probably separated the tithing. If it's an expensive thing like lychees or something like that, then I could understand, the Am Haaretz is going to be cheap. He's going to say I'm stingy. He's not going to want to give the Levite the 10%. It's not punishable by death. It's just so much. I have to give so much to the Levite. So certain foods, or most foods, we assume we have to be careful to separate the extra tithings. But if something is extremely inexpensive, so these are like low quality dates and other food items that are very low quality. So here we can assume that the Am Haaretz did do the tithings, and the rabbi said you don't have to be concerned about it. We're not obligating you to go above and beyond to remove the tithings. Yes, Ben.
Am Haaretz, could it be gears that are not really watching that much or something for the tithe? No.
No, it's Am Haaretz.
Because it means nations of the land, So it could be non-Jews too, I thought, but maybe not.
No, we're talking about Jewish people who are not, they're not following all the rules fully. They're not, and maybe they're not knowledgeable in all the rules to the
they
fullest
behave
extent.
like Am Haaretz. They behave like the other people in the land.
Right. But it wouldn't be right to say that, because they do separate truma. They do, they do a lot of things, but they don't. But the tithings, that's what we're concerned. And many of them do do the tithings. So the fact is that there are many that don't. So the Gemara says here, what are the leniencies of? The Gemara brings a Mishnah. The leniencies of Demai, Hakalim Sheba Demai. So now. Again, we're 7 lines up from the bottom. Hashisin, v'harimin. These are many food items, and we'll soon translate them. Hashisin, v'harimin, v'ozradin, v'naishuach, v'naishitma, v'guftin, v'nitzpa, v'naivlais t'mara. So it mentions here the big words that we're looking for is these words naivlais tomorrow. Now, I mentioned to you the reason we're lenient about all these food items is because all these produce, because they're not so valuable. They're very cheap produce, and Am Haaretz will tithe it because what's the big deal? An extra few pennies, I'll give a dime. I'm giving a quarter away. What's the big deal? But there is another explanation that has to do with the fact that these items are often left for free, like people take them for free. So they might be hefker also. So it not only is it hefker means ownerless. So not only is it possible that they were tithed, But there's also the possibility that they don't need to be tithed because they come from ownerless produce. And ownerless produce doesn't need to be tithed either. So that's an additional point that other commentaries bring down. It's actually, there's a famous term for this called the sveka. It's a double doubt. A double doubt means, number one, we're not sure if the Am Haaretz tithed it. And even if he didn't tithe it, it could be it doesn't need to be tithed because it came from ownerless property, hefker. So that would be a double doubt. Okay, so the Gemara says, what are all these food items? What are all these, what type of produce are these? I'm sorry, I skipped the word. Tomorrow. The first word is, no, I didn't skip the word. Shisin. I did skip a word. Shisin. The word shisin, what is shisin? Min te'enim. That is a type of figs that are desert figs. And they are obviously these are all low quality stuff. Rimin is kandi. And the different opinions what this is, maybe lotus or whose radin are tulshi, which they translate, I think, as sorb apples. Benois shuach te'ene chivarta, the type of white figs. And some explain that they grow in the forest. Now, benois shikma. What are benois shikma? Rabbi Chanan Yechanan duvli. These are some type of sycamore figs. Gufnin. What are gufnin? Shilhei gufni. They are the late season grapes. Nitzpa. What's nitzpa? That's the pircha. That's the capers. Caper berries.
Can't have lox without capers. That's true.
So then it says, what are noivleis tomorrow? And this is what we needed because our Gemara said noivleis, there's two opinions what it is. And now the Gemara concluded, no, noivleis, we know what it is. Noivleis tomorrow is what the two opinions are. So that's what we find here in this Mishnah, regarding this Mishnah, that it said noivleis tomorrow. So the commentaries, Reb Ilah and Reb Zera, Chad Amar Bushli Kamra. One says it means these dates that are dried out, the heat from the heat, and burned from the heat and dried out. B'chad Amar, and one says Tamri Dezika. These are the dates that the wind blew off. So that is explaining the that Mishnah in Demai. Now the Gemara now deals with the same issue. Can both of these explanations fit? Does it make sense that dates that are burned or heated, they burn from the heat and dried out, does it make sense that they should not be obligated in an extra tithing? Does that make sense? How about if you translate it to mean dates that are blown off by the wind? Does that make sense? They should be exempt from doing the demai, from doing the extra tithing that's necessary for demai produce. So that's what the Gemara is going to ask now. It's good if you learn that they are burned by the heat. That's why we learned that it says that these are leniencies in demai, because in this case, sveikon hu de pater. Demai means we are not sure if the Am Haaretz separated the tithings. So when it's sveikon, when we're in doubt, you are exempt from these items. Havada'on chayiv, but if you would know for sure that it wasn't it wasn't tithed, then you would be obligated in giving You would be obligated in doing the tithing, right? This is produce from the ground. You got to tithe it. From a tree, you have to tithe it. But if you learn that it's dates of the Zika, if you learn that it's dates that are blown off the tree, so here you will tell me that we're not sure if they separated the tithings, and if they're in doubt, you would be exempt. But vadon chayev would, if you know for sure that if you would know for sure that they were not separated, the tithings were not separated, would you be chayev? Hefkera ninhu, these are definitely hefker. These are definitely ownerless. Before we mentioned that these items might be ownerless, and there would be this is reason to be lenient in demai. If you don't know if they're hefker, if you don't know that they are ownerless, then you would have to give tithings. But since we're in doubt that they're ownerless, and we're also in doubt that maybe the Am Haaretz separated the tithings, therefore we're lenient in these items. What happens if you know for sure that they're ownerless? Of course, you're exempt. Now, the Gemara says that dates are definitely ownerless. And the reason why they would be ownerless is because the owner of the date tree, the date palm, when the wind blows off the dates, what happens is the dates end up hanging out on the earth until the owner finds out. By the time the owner finds out, they've already been eaten by different ants and worms and maggots, and ultimately the owner doesn't care for them. So the ones that blow off the tree are exempt from tithings because they are ownerless. That's the general rule, that the owners always don't care. If you find a date on the grass, you could take it. That's what it would seem like from this Gemara, that the dates they're considered ownerless. They're ownerless property. Now don't try doing that in America. If you walk by someone's date tree and go stealing the date. But in the time of the Gemara, it seems like it would be considered ownerless, and you could it's totally permissible to take it because the owner makes it ownerless because he doesn't expect to find them when they're still in an edible state. You happen to be walking by and the worms didn't get to them, so therefore you could take it and you could enjoy it. But the official rule is that they are ownerless. And if they're ownerless, why does it doesn't seem to fit in our Mishnah where it talks about the leniencies of Demai? This is not a leniency of Demai. If you wanted to tell me that we're talking about the dates that are blown off the tree, that's not a leniency of Demai. That's a leniency of Meiser. You never have to take Meiser. You don't have to take Meiser for whenever you buy them because they are, even if you know that they're not, you know that they're not tithe because they're hefker, they're ownerless. So the Gemara answers that no, it's not a problem. Here, what are we talking about? We're talking about that you gathered them together and made a pile. That you made a pile. Because you made a pile, the rabbis decreed that if you make a pile as if you're harvesting these and as if they were harvested, you would need to separate the tithing. And the reason is because other people are looking. They're going to see that they'll see what you're doing. They'll think that you didn't remove the meiser from. And because you make a pile, there is a rule that you would need to separate meiser from it. If you're taking for a few fruits is one thing, If you're making a whole pile, you're making a whole commercial setting over here. So then that means that these are not. They don't look like they're hefker. Hefker is when you find one thing on the floor. That's hefker. That's ownerless. If you're making a whole pile out of it, it looks like you're part of you're doing this as a commercial business. And because of that, the rabbis established you would need to do the tithing. So Damar Rab Yitzchok, Amar Yochanan, yes, Ezra.
When you form the pile, that's the final step. And once the final step is done in whatever process, in this particular case with these, that's when you become the requirement of tithing occurs. And I think that's the reason why they're saying this, is because the fact of the matter is that once he makes it into this pile, into this cone-shaped pile or whatever it is, that's the last step of the process of gathering. And so therefore you become automatically required to take Meiser from that pile.
So the thing is that we're dealing here with that it's only rabbinic, that you really wouldn't be obligated in this scenario of hefker. Because they're hefker, they're ownerless, you really would not be obligated. What you're saying is that there are rules about when the stage of Meiser is established and when it's hukva Meiser and so on, which it's not only making a pile, there are other options as well, but that is not going to obligate these produce to take the tithing. If you take a look in, let's see, if you take a look over here in Rashi, you actually see it from the next case, but here, look at Rashi, haleket v'ashicha b'peah, afal pisha peturin min ha'meiser, even though they're exempt, likton ani v'asan goyrin hukvu l'meiser midrabanan. Demand dechazi savar shetvuas karkoihi. Person who sees it will think this is the tevua of his. They'll think that this is the tevua of his grain, and therefore you need to separate meiser. So it's not the regular category of establishing an obligation for meiser. It's only a rabbinic obligation because someone will see. Demand dechazi. I'm emphasizing that last line over there in Rashi. Demand dechazi. Person who sees will think that this is your, grain from your field, and it's not hefker, it's not ownerless. But the rule, the official rule would be that you are exempt from meiser, even if you made the pile. But here, because someone will see, therefore you would need to separate meiser because of it doesn't look. It looks like you might be doing something wrong. So, however, with regard to these dates, these Tamri Dezika, where it's from an Am Haaretz, and we don't know if he separated Meiser or not. So here, you would be exempt if you're not sure, but if you're sure he didn't separate Meiser, you would need to separate Meiser. So again, we're dealing with a case where there's a pile. You made a pile out of these. You're not sure if the owner separated Meiser or not. And therefore, because of that, you would be exempt from Meiser if you're not sure. But if you are sure that he did not separate Meiser, you would then need to separate Meiser. So that's what the Mishnah, that's the exemption of the Mishnah. Now, let me finish off this line. Adam Rabbi Yitzchok, Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Rabbi Yitzchok said the name of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, haleka v'ashich b'peah, the produce that's left for the poor, that you made a goyren, shalson goyren, you made a pile out of it, hukbu lemaiser, it becomes established for meiser, at least rabbinically. And these leket shikhan pei are the famous 3 items that are given to the poor when you're harvesting, and anything, something falls. The leket is when you're harvesting and 1 or 2 stalks fall to the ground. So those you have to leave for the poor to keep. Shikha is when you forget stuff. If you forget 1 or 2 bundles, or you forget 1 or 2 stalks, those you leave for the poor to enjoy. The poor people come after you finish harvesting. They come and they take all that stuff that you have to leave. And the peya is the corner of the field. And elu devarim she'ein lahem shiur hapeya. Peya is one of those things that doesn't have a measurement how much you have to leave for the poor. And peya, peya is the corner of the field, and the corner of the field is you're not allowed to harvest it. You're supposed to leave it for the poor to take. So that's how it works in the official rules of people who are in farming. They have to leave the leket, shikha, and peya for the poor, and then after the poor come and take, and they sometimes they come twice after they. So at a certain point, it becomes permissible for everyone to come and take it, because after the poor people did their took what they wanted, then it's like free for all. It's anyone can take it. Now, what happens when the poor person takes the leket, shikha, and peya? Do they have to separate tithings from it? And the answer is no. They are exempt from tithings. When they take their produce, it is exempt, and it's based on a verse that it's based on a verse that implies that only when the Levites don't get a portion, that's when you have to give tithings, and therefore this produce. The Levites that are poor are able to enjoy, and therefore there's no obligation to separate the tithings. So ultimately, what happens if you did create a pile of this leket, shikha, and peya? And if you did make a pile of it, then you would be obligated in separate. Even the poor people would have to separate the tithings from the leket, shikha, and peya. These 3 types of gifts to the poor. The poor person would have to separate tithings from it, because it looks like you are harvesting your field, and it doesn't look like it's leket, shikha, and peya. Someone will see and they'll think that you don't have to separate tithings, so therefore you should separate. Therefore, you'll need to separate. So that is the case that we're explaining in Demai, that the same law applies when it comes to questionable tithings, that we're dealing with a case where you made a pile and you made a pile of these dates that blew off the tree, and you would need to separate tithings if you are sure that tithings were not separated. But if you're not sure, then you can rely on it being a leniency, one of the leniencies of Demai. Now, the Gemara says, Ika di Amri, there are those that say a different question on the argument of Rabbi Law and Rabbi on the argument of Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Law. What is their question? Their question is, and now we're on page 41a. 41a, Bishloima Lamanda Amar Tamri Dezika. It's good if you want to explain that the case here about the Demai is Tamri Dezika, dates that are blown off. If you want to explain it that way, that we're dealing with Tamri Dezika, and in the case of Demai, and you have to add one thing here before we continue, and that is in the Mishnah that deals with brachos is it only says noivlois plain, and it means bushli kamra. It means the ones that are burned by the heat. So it's good if you want to explain the case of Demai where it says noivlois tamara means dates that are blown off, and when it just says noivlois alone, it means burned by the heat. Hainu dahacha karile noivlois stama. That would explain why here it uses one term noivlois. In our Mishnah and Brachos, it uses just the word noivlois. It's called noivlois stama, stam. It just uses plainly noivlois. And over there, where it's referring to a different type of dates, it uses the word noivlois tomorrow. V'hasam karile tomorrow. Over there, it adds the word tomorrow to it, because it's a different entity. Ela lamanda amar bushle kamra. But if you want to say that when it says noivlois tomorrow, it means bushli chamra. If you want to say in the case of demai, that it means burned by the heat, and then the case of brachos is also means burned by the heat, but it only says noivlois there. Nisni idi v'idi. We should have learned both cases noivlois tomorrow. It should say by both of them noivlois tomorrow. Instead, what does it say in brachos? It just says noivlois. It doesn't say noivlois tomorrow. Or it could have said in both of them, noivlois stama. Both of them should have said just noivlois plain without the word tomorrow. So the Gemara is bothered with what if it means the same thing. Why is it using one term in one place and a different term in the other place? It seems like the other view that says one place means one thing and one place means the other thing, that fits better than if you want to say both mean the same thing, and yet it uses a different term in each of the places. So the Gemara ends off, kasha, this is actually a question. The Gemara does not answer the kasha. It's not a very strong question because, okay, here it uses a different term, there it uses one term, here it uses a different term. And the Gemara does not say teku. Teku would be a very strong question. Here, the Gemara just says it's a kasha. It's a little surprising that it uses this term here and that term there. But ultimately, these are the views of what the noivlois tomorrow means. And the main reason we brought this whole thing, which really doesn't have so much to do with our discussion, was only to try to figure out what our Mishnah meant when it said that you say shahakol on noivlois. What are noivlois and what is the conclusion? Noivlois means dates that are burned by the heat and they're dried out. That's really what we brought this whole thing for, but that's the way it works in Gemara. You look into some other place and you try to figure out if the wording, does this fit with the other wording? And then we got sidetracked with, does it make sense to explain that Mishnah somewhere else the way we're explaining it there? Now, that does not really have to do with our Gemara, but we got sidetracked and we discussed it in a little more length than maybe necessary for our Gemara, but that's the style of the Gemara. So now we're up to the next piece of Gemara, and the next piece of Gemara deals with the end part of the Mishnah. The end part of the Mishnah said that if you have many types of species in front of you, Rabbi Yehuda says if you have from the 7 species, you should recite the bracha on them. And the rabbis say you recite the bracha on whatever you want. Now, the Gemara explains this to mean that they're dealing with a case where the bracha is the same bracha. It's exactly the same bracha in all the foods that are in front of you. And the question is, which one should you recite the bracha on and then exempt all the other food items? The bracha that you say, the food you say the bracha on should be the most special, because for a bracha, you want to recite it on the most special. What is considered the most special? Is it what you consider special, or is it what the Torah considers special? And here we have the Gemara explaining. Amar Ula. So we're now let me start at the beginning of the line. Five lines down from the top of the page. We're on 41a. Hayu lefanov minim harbe. If you had in front of you many species, so we have an argument in the Mishnah. If you recite the bracha on the Shivas Haminim, on the 7 species, or on the one you like better. The Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis argue. Amar Ula. Ula says, Machlaikis, this argument is applicable Kisha Birchoi Sehen, Bisha Birchoi Sehen Shabbos, when their brachos are the same. And Rashi gives an example here that we're dealing with olives and apples. Both of them have the same bracha. What's the bracha on olives? The bracha on apples? Ha'etz. What are you going to do? You're not going to recite 2 brachas. You have both of them in front of you. You recite one bracha ha'etz, and it covers both of the foods that are, both of the apples that are in front of you that are ha'etz. So the argument between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is when it's the same bracha, and you want to know which one should be, the blessing itself be recited on. The Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Rabbi Yehuda holds min shiva adif. He holds that from the 7 species, though that anything that's from the 7 species is it takes precedence, is better. Rabbanan Safri, and the Rabbanan holds min chaviv adif, the species that is more precious to you, cherished by you, that takes precedence. And that's what you should recite the bracha on. So what Rula is explaining really is, in the Mishnah, it was a little vague. It said, choose whatever you want. The rabbi said, do whatever you want. What did they mean when they said, do whatever you want? Did they mean just do it as you wish? Or choose the one you really want, that's the one you should recite a bracha. In other words, were they emphasizing the word want? Choose the one you want, or they do whatever you want. Do as you like. Whatever you do is good. Or were they specifically emphasizing what you want? That's the one you should recite the bracha on. So the way the Gemara is explaining it is that it means chaviv. It means the rabbis were not just saying do as you wish. They were saying pick the one that is cherished by you. That's the one you should recite a bracha on. And so we're explaining the words of the Mishnah that they mean chaviv. That's what the words of the Mishnah mean when it says Eza Sheyirtze, whichever one you want. It means chaviv. You got to recite the bracha on the one that's cherished. Now there is an argument in the commentaries. Does this mean what you normally would like more, or does it mean what you would like now? What's more precious to you now? So, for example, now you're in the mood of something a little sour, but you normally, you like apples much better than olives, because apples, a nice sweet apple is good, but now you happen to be in the mood of something more bitter. So there's an argument in the commentaries. What does it mean when it says pick the one you cherish? Does it mean the one you cherish right now? And right now, you just finished eating 3 chocolate bars and your mouth is so full of sugar that you want to have something a little sour, and you cherish that olive because you want something a little salty now. And you really have no interest in, well, you're going to eat the apple, but you really want to have the olive right now. So would that be called the chaviv? Or do you say, no, the apple is what you normally cherish much more than olives, and therefore you should recite the bracha? According to the rabbis, you're supposed to recite the bracha on what is normally more chaviv to you, more precious to you, and you give preciousness to an apple more than an olive. You consider apples more precious. Other people are different. I happen to like olives, but some people, like apples better, and you consider apples more precious, so more special, and so therefore you would have to. You should recite the bracha on the apple and exempt the olive. Now it doesn't mean you have to eat the whole apple. Eat one little piece, and then you can eat your olive. but which one deserves that bracha, that sanctity, that special bracha that you recite on something you like? It either means on something you like right now, or it means something that you normally consider precious. That's how we would recite the bracha on. Yes, Ben?
I understood it to be that whatever you want, not whatever is precious or whatever you like, Yirtzeh is you want. But the Rebbe is here, I think, are flexing their muscle and saying, that their way is the right way.
Well, we're explaining what they mean in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a little ambiguous, and it says, as you wish, what Asher Yirtzeh.
Yirtzeh, what you want.
What you want. And the rabbis are explaining it to mean what you consider more cherished.
They say it's the favorable one, But anyhow, I wanted to say when I'm in Florida, I never saw much dates on the floor under the trees. I saw a lot of coconuts under the trees.
So you want to know if you're allowed to just take them, huh? I see already.
No, I don't even like them. So.
Yes, Susan.
Okay, so if one of the 7 species is in front of me and happens to be a wheat, and I don't like it, I cherish it because that's what I've taught, but I don't eat it. I'd rather have something else. It's depending on what I'm going to eat.
Susan, let me just cut you off. We're dealing with a case where you are planning on eating both. If you are not planning on eating something, you do not have to. We are not forcing you to eat something you don't want. If you're planning on eating both, but you're really in the mood of one first, right? But you cherish the other one first. That's where I was saying the commentaries disagree in such a case. The Gemara says you pick what's chaviv. The question is, what does that mean? Chaviv, what's cherished by you? Is it what's cherished right now? So you're planning on eating an olive and an apple. You put them in front of you. You're planning on eating both. You like both, but it could be right now you want the olive, but normally you like the apple better. So which one is what is the meaning when the Gemara says chaviv? That's what we explain.
So what
if you don't want to eat any one of them, you don't have to eat it. If you don't want to eat one of them, then there's no question.
Okay, so I cherish both, the apple and the olive.
Right.
So depending on what I'm going to eat, that's the blessing?
If you're not planning on eating one of them, then that totally does not enter the conversation. There's nothing to talk about. If you're planning on eating both, that's when we have a discussion. If you're planning on eating both. If you're not planning on eating both, that has nothing to do with our Gemara.
Okay.
We do not obligate people to eat stuff that's in front of them.
Okay.
That's maybe an American custom. You eat everything that's in front of you, but it's not a Jewish thing.
Okay.
And you're not forced to eat what's in front of you.
What I'm asking,
planning on eating both, which one do you recite the bracha on to exempt the other one? That's what we're dealing with.
Okay.
If you're planning on